All right, let's dive right into this explainer and unpack what is basically a historical detective story. We're looking at how our immaterial minds actually manage to connect with the physical world. You know, if you've ever wondered how the physical stuff sitting around you actually ends up as thoughts inside your head, well, you are absolutely in the right place today. We're going to be looking at a classic, highly structured text called The Science of the Human Soul and Its Faculties. And let me tell you, it gives us a really brilliant, systematic breakdown of human perception.
This classical text gives us a super clear roadmap. We're going to start by looking at how to study the human soul, map out our inner faculties, look at the pure mechanics of sensation, debunk some historically famous false theories, and then finally uncover the true cause of sensation.
So, Section 1, Studying the Human Soul. Let's lay the groundwork and define exactly what this text means when it talks about studying human nature.
What's really fascinating here is how the source defines psychology, or actually anthropology as it's also called here. It's not just the study of the mind in total isolation. It's defined as the study of the whole man. The text points out that in us humans, you've got being, life, sense, reason, and corporeal nature, all totally united to our spiritual nature. It's a package deal. You literally can't know the soul rightly without looking at its relationship to the physical body.
To study this, the author explicitly rejects two pretty extreme historical methods. First up is the purely experimental method championed by guys like Bacon and Locke. The author argues this method only looks at facts, and because of that, it can never actually solve the deeper problems about the essence or the origin of the soul. On the flip side, you have the a priori method from Schelling and Hegel. Now, they tried to construct science purely through reasoning, totally skipping over observation. The text basically says, look, relying solely on raw facts or relying purely on reason, it just gives us an incomplete, false picture.
So, the crucial point here is that we have to use what the author calls the analytico-synthetical method. I know, big words, but it's actually exactly what it sounds like. It's joining observation to reason. You observe what the mind does, and then you use reason to figure out what the mind actually is. It's about bringing both puzzle pieces together.
Okay, with our methods sorted out, let's move right into Section 2, Mapping Our Inner Faculties. Time to map out the actual architecture of our inner world.
The text breaks the human soul down into three distinct faculties. First, vegetative faculties. These are purely active, dealing with basic physical life, which the text categorizes under cosmology. But for our purposes in psychology, our focus rests heavily on the next two, the sensitive and intellective faculties. Now, what's super vital here is that these are primarily passive, meaning, they have to be acted upon by an object first before they do anything. But they're also secondarily active because they are vital, living powers.
And this brilliantly illustrates the difference between our specific psychological faculties, cognitive versus appetitive. Let's look at the cognitive side first. In cognition, the object you're knowing actually assumes the immaterial conditions of you, the subject knowing it. Think about it. If you look at a physical stone, that stone becomes immaterial when it exists as a concept in your senses. But over on the appetitive side, our desires, our will, it's the exact opposite. The subject acts upon and tends toward union with the object, sharing in its perfection or imperfection. So cognitive faculties pull the object's form into us, while appetitive faculties push us to transform into the object we desire. It's just a beautiful symmetry, right?
Now that we've got the mind mapped out, let's tackle the core mystery in Section 3, the mechanics of sensation. How exactly do these sensitive faculties actually perceive the outside world?
The text defines cognition and sensation as an internal operation. External things can't physically enter your mind, right? There's no tree physically inside your head. So a living being becomes aware of external things only insofar as they are made present within it. Sensation happens when our passive powers are literally informed, as in given form, by the sensible object.
The author establishes some pretty strict rules for these senses. Step 1. They must reside in a corporeal, material organ. A physical body can only produce a material modification, right? So the receiving sense has to have a physical organ, like an eye or an ear. Step 2 is really fascinating. The senses cannot reflect entirely upon their own operations. Why? Because they rely on extended physical organs. A physical extended thing can never entirely fold back in on itself in a perfect reflection. And finally, Step 3. Because the sense is a material vital organ, its object absolutely must be something material.
But before we get to the author's true answer for how all this works, we have to take a detour into Section 4, False Theories of Perception, where the text systematically dismantles some rival ideas.
The author uses pure logic to expose the flaws in these famous rival systems.
First up, Leibniz and Fichte. They claimed the soul is the sole cause of sensation. But if that's true, why can't we just will away a headache or conjure up pleasant sensations whenever we want? It completely contradicts human experience. Then there's Berkeley, who said physical bodies don't even exist and God just directly feeds ideas into our souls. The author counters that, well, this makes God deceptive. Plus, it completely fails to explain microscopes. I mean, why would God change the idea of a tiny organism just because we happen to look through a piece of grass? Finally, the materialists claimed sensation is just a physical impression on the brain. But the brain has distinct, separate parts. Our everyday experience tells us that our sensation of an object is a single, undivided unity, and a compartmentalized physical brain just can't explain that on its own.
Having cleared all those false theories away, we finally arrive at Section 5, the true cause of sensation. This is the text's grand resolution to the mystery of perception.
The author argues that sensation isn't just one single thing. It actually requires a dual causality. First, we've got the passive element. There has to be an external, physical object that acts upon us. Simple enough. But second, we have the active element. The sense organ itself must actively react. Sensation only actually happens when both of these elements meet in the middle.
And here is the absolute key to this entire text. As we noted, a physical object, like a tree or a car, cannot physically enter your brain. So how do you perceive it? Well, the text states, the sensible object is joined to the sentient subject by means of a certain representation of itself, which is called the sensible species. The physical object itself doesn't enter the brain, but a representation of it, this intentional, sensible species, does. That's the secret sauce.
Let's look a little closer at the properties of this sensible species. It is not just some simple physical excitation or a random jolt to your nerves. It is an intentional representation of the object. It's the exact medium by which sensation is affected. The text uses the example of an image forming on the retina of the eye. It's not just mere motion. It's a representation actively connecting the physical thing to the sense. And fascinatingly, the sensible species can actually remain in the sense even if the external object is totally removed. The author notes that this perfectly explains things like hallucinations or insanity, where the sensible species sticks around and the person perceives the object as if it were still right there in front of them. Crazy, right?
All of this creates a really beautiful, direct chain of causality. Step 1 is the impressed species. That's when the external object acts on the physical sense organ, literally impressing its form upon it. Step 2 is the expressed species. The sense is informed, it actively reacts, and the intention is fully realized. And guess what? That expressed species is the actual conscious sensation you experience. It's a perfect internal action that bridges the gap between the physical world and your immaterial mind.
So, as we wrap up this explainer, I'll leave you with this provocative thought to ponder. If every single sensation you experience is an immanent act, a representation bridging a physical object out there and an immaterial reality in here, how much of your reality is constructed entirely within you? Where exactly is the boundary between the material world and your inner consciousness? It's a lot to think about. Thanks so much for joining me on this deep dive, and I hope this structured look at our inner faculties helps you see your own perceptions in a whole new light.